Every year, millions of people walk through Times Square. They look up at the towering billboards and the neon lights, but very few look down to think about what's physically supporting them. If you plunge straight beneath the pavement, past the subways and the utility lines, you won't find solid bedrock. You will find dark, muddy marshland. Long before the concrete was poured, this terrain was a hostile wetland. The ground was so unstable that America's earliest inhabitants and even the first European colonists avoided trying to build settlements here. Looking at 17th century records mapped onto today's street grid, we can see exactly why. A series of freshwater streams converged right near modern-day 10th and 40th Streets. The Dutch named this waterway the Great Kill, and it flowed right through a low-lying marsh known as Reed Valley before emptying into the Hudson River. Building a major urban center on top of a saturated valley makes very little sense geographically. For Times Square to exist at all, engineers had to dismantle and rebuild the landscape from the ground up. Through the 18th century, this land remained mostly open agriculture, eventually becoming a 22-acre tract known as Eden Farm on the city's northern edge. But in 1803, a real estate investor named John Jacob Astor bought the farm at a foreclosure sale for roughly $25,000. He knew that as New York's population rapidly expanded, the city would inevitably push north. As Astor began dividing up the land and selling off individual lots, developers quickly realized they couldn't just build on top of a swamp. This rush to build forced the very first underground interventions, digging cellars and wells to create a foundation that wouldn't sink into the mud. The problem of the sinking mud required a drastic solution. In 1847, crews initiated a massive grading project. To meet the new street level, they had to haul in enough earth to artificially raise the swampy ground at 41st Street by more than 10 feet. The natural creek beds of the Great Kill and the surrounding marshes were interred beneath tons of fill. Those old riverbeds became the first major artifacts locked beneath the square. But instead of fighting the water, the city's engineers used it to their advantage. Under West 42nd Street, they replaced the natural creeks with man-made sewer and drainage pipelines, intentionally placing them there to utilize the valley's natural downhill slope. Early drainage works absorbed the physical layout of the valley, weaponizing the natural ecosystem into a new municipal grid. By the late 19th century, the area had been officially renamed Longacre Square and transformed into the city's horse and carriage hub. With new commercial buildings popping up, property owners began digging masonry vaults right beneath the public sidewalks to store coal and accept deliveries through heavy metal covers. Below those vaults, crews dug deep exposed trenches straight down Broadway to lay massive cast iron water mains alongside early gas lines. Then, in 1882, a new layer was forced into these crowded trenches, New York's district steam network, pumping high-pressured vapor to local businesses. This system meant that large buildings no longer needed their own internal boilers. It reduced the heavy local smog that plagued the city and allowed property owners to build significantly larger commercial spaces above ground. Around the same time, New York legally banned the dangerous tangle of overhead wires. This meant all the new electrical cables, telegraph, and telephone lines had to be buried right alongside the heavy pipes in shallow, dry trenches. By stacking water, gas, steam, and electricity into this tight underground sandwich, engineers created the mechanical lifeline that powered Longacre Square's commercial expansion. When the new surface-level cable cars arrived on Broadway, they severely cut into the local horse and carriage trade. Looking for a new source of revenue, prominent property owners pivoted and began building enormous entertainment venues, like the Winter Garden Theater. To funnel audiences directly to these new theaters, the city initiated its most ambitious underground project yet, the Interborough Rapid Transit Subway. Between 1900 and 1904, massive cut-and-cover tunnels were excavated right through the heart of the district. But digging this deep presented a serious hazard. Because the entire area was still physically situated in a former wetland, the new transit tunnels and the deepest building foundations now sat directly below the area's natural water table. You can't just seal off a swamp. To keep the stations and basements from flooding, engineers had to install complex, highly expensive drainage systems, requiring constant mechanical pumping to actively clear out the ongoing groundwater seepage. The transit revolution transformed the district into a permanent engineering project. The subway only stays dry today because of continuous mechanical intervention against the water, trying to reclaim its territory. As the district became New York's cultural center, the New York Times established its towering new headquarters right in the middle of it. In 1904, to reflect this new skyline dominance, the city officially changed the name from Longacre Square to Times Square. While the newspaper shaped public perception above, an entirely different communication network was expanding below. An intricate web of pneumatic tubes shot mail across the city, utilizing a massive, largely invisible central hub located at the Times Square Station Post Office on West 39th Street. Fed by these massive subterranean transit arteries, the surface intersections swelled with people. This density peaked during the iconic public celebrations of VJ Day in 1945, cementing the square's status as a global focal point. However, that same accessibility later facilitated a steep cultural and economic decline. By the 1960s and 70s, West 42nd Street, nicknamed the Deuce, relied heavily on sheer volume rather than prestige, filling up with adult cinemas and cheap thrills that drove local crime and kept corporate investment far away. The sheer volume of human traffic funneled through the subway enabled both the prestigious theater scene and the gritty vice market to thrive in the same physical footprint. The modern reinvention of the district started in the 1990s through a concerted effort by the city and the new 42nd Street nonprofit. A major turning point arrived when Disney fully committed to restoring the historic New Amsterdam Theater, signaling to other corporations that the square was once again safe for mass commercial investment. Down below, the subway complex evolved right alongside the newly curated spectacle above. The historic transit tunnels were adapted to include modern retail spaces and permanent large-scale public artworks commissioned through the MTA's Arts and Design program. Today, you can stand in the middle of Times Square, surrounded by glowing screens and millions of tourists, and never realize what it takes to keep it all standing. Every piece of that spectacle relies on a 400-year-old multi-layered machine working relentlessly in the dark to hold back the swamp.